Hi everyone. In today's video, I want to talk to you all about the magic of capitalism. So in order for me to tell you the story about what the magic is behind capitalism, I want to introduce you to two characters and a couple of variables that we're going to talk about throughout. So the two characters, the first one is the capitalist. The capitalist owns the factory, owns the place of where production is happening. And the capitalist usually sometimes is also referred to as part of the bourgeoisie. Let's see if I could spell it. It's always complicated spelling. The second set of characters are the wage workers. The wage worker. And the wage worker is the one that works in the factory. Sometimes the wage worker is referred to as being part of the proletariat. Now, there are a couple of numbers we're going to look at in order to understand the magic of capitalism. The first number we're going to look at is the variable that we're going to call C. C is going to stand for constant capital. Constant capital is just another word for overhead cost. So these are things like if you own a factory, maybe the mortgage on the land, or maybe you're paying rent, electricity costs, the cost of the trash to be picked up, and all the different kind of costs that are required to maintain the factory. The second variable or number we're going to look at is the variable V, which is going to stand for variable capital. And that is basically another word for wages. And the third number we're going to look at is S, which is surplus value. That's just a fancy way of saying profits. Now, let's go back to the story of the magic of capitalism. Capitalism is going to do something quite interesting. So prior to capitalism, so if we are looking at pre-capitalist circuits, or pre-capitalist ways of the flow of stuff and the flow of money, what we used to have is we used to start with commodities. And our commodities, we used to then exchange them for some money. And then we used to use that money and exchange it back for commodities. I'm going to use ComD, that's my shorthand for commodities. Capitalism. So once capitalism emerges in history, it's going to turn this upside down. Under capitalism, we're going to start with money, and we're going to exchange that money for commodities, and then we're going to sell those commodities back for money. So that's one of the interesting new things that capitalism is going to do, and we're going to find out what the implications are. The second thing that capitalism is going to do that's quite magical, this is really the magic of capitalism, is we're going to input two things, C plus V. So we're going to input overhead costs and we're going to input wages. And then what's going to come out of this input, our output, is going to be C plus V, so the same thing that we put in, and this new thing called surplus value. So somehow, the magic we're interested in is, when we put this input, how do we end up with this third thing that wasn't there when we started out with? When we started out with, was just these two. And we ended up with those two back and more stuff, more money, more profits. So how does that happen? In order to do that, in order to figure out kind of how that happens, we're going to try to go back to the beginnings of capitalism. And we're going to make a simple example to be able to illustrate kind of this magic occurring. So let's start off with a factory. And for me, I'm going to use the example of a factory that produces, let's say, basketball jerseys. I'm into basketball. So here's a basketball jersey factory. And in our factory that produces basketball jerseys, this factory runs for 10 hours every single day. In order for it to function for 10 hours, the overhead costs that we need to put in, the amount of money that it's going to cost to run this factory for 10 hours is $100. So let's say it's $100 for 10 hours, meaning $10 for an hour, right? And then our overhead, our wages, the amount of money that we're going to pay for one worker to work for 10 hours is going to be $50. So $50 for 10 hours, or $5 for 1 hour. And then we're gonna let us assume that one jersey costs $25. So you're gonna be like, well, how does a jersey cost $25? Those things are like $130 these days. But one, this is just an example that I'm making up. Or two, you could say this is a bootleg basketball jersey factory where the jerseys only cost $25 and are a lot more affordable. So we have a factory that functions for 10 hours. In order for it to function for 10 hours, we have to spend $100 worth of overhead costs, electricity, rent, and we have to pay our worker $50 to work for that whole day. And we're gonna make each jersey is going to cost us $25. So let's run this out. Let's see how this actually looks. So let's calculate here. Let's draw this line. And let's put up 10 hours. So hour 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and here's 10. So let us assume that, so this is every hour that this factory is functioning, and this is the amount of value that is generated, that is produced. So let's just, for the sake of argument, say that at every hour, we make one jersey. So at every hour, we're producing $25 worth of stuff. So on hour 2, we make another $25. In hour 3, we make another $25, and so on. Right? So that every hour what happens is this factory, this assembly line that we're at, is moving and it's functioning. The lights are on, the rent is paid, the sewage gets picked up, all that is happening. And so here's this assembly line that's working, and then here is this worker who is working on this assembly line. And as this worker works on this assembly line, at every hour, he or she is able to make one jersey. And that jersey is valued at $25. So every hour you're producing $25 worth of value. So if you're running this factory, what happens is, so let's put our dollar signs here. After the first 4 hours, so we run the assembly line and it functions for 4 hours. After 4 hours, we have generated 25 plus 25 plus 25 plus 25. We've generated $100. So that $100 means that is the money that we put in for the overhead cost. So after running this assembly line for 4 hours, in which the worker works for 4 hours to create 4 jerseys or generate $100 worth of value, after 4 hours, the $100 that the capitalist, the person who owns the factory, has invested is replenished. So C is replenished after 4 hours. Then you let the assembly line work for 2 more hours, hours 5 and 6. In hours 5 and 6, you have created $50 of value. That means the amount that you're going to pay the worker to work for 10 hours, which is $50, is replenished within hour 5 and 6. So V is replenished. Now, hours 7, 8, 9, and 10, those hours are they are generating simply surplus value. So here, from hours 7, 8, 9, and 10, this is pure profit. So if you look at this whole thing, what you could see is that after 10 hours, for 10 hours, we've generated how much value? 25 times 10. So there's $250 of value generated in 10 hours. For 10 hours. Right? So out of this $250 of value that's generated in 10 hours, if we break it down based on to see what's going on with the capitalist as opposed to the wage worker. The capitalist here, so let's go to the capitalist first. The capitalist invested $150, right? So the capitalist put in $150 and then was able to get out $250. The worker, on the other hand, the worker worked for 10 hours, and so what the worker did is the worker mixed his ability or her ability or his body's ability to work, mixed the ability or the capacity of their body to labor with the machinery that is available to them to produce jerseys that could be sold for $25 each, so that the worker generated or worked, and his work or her work generated $250 of value. But got paid $50. The rest, in a sense, the money that they generated between hours 1 to 4 and 7 to 10 did not belong to them. The only money that belonged to them was hours 5 and 6. The rest, they worked for someone else. They worked for free, in a sense. So how is that possible? What's going on here? How is it that there is such a discrepancy where the capitalist puts in $150, but somehow gets out $250, whereas the worker generates $250, but they get paid $50? What's happening there? What would happen if we zoomed in? What would we find out? And here is where I would say that there is 2 values operating here. There is labor power, and then there is labor. Labor is what we normally think of. This is the value generated by my labor or work. So the value that this worker generated by their work is $250. But that worker doesn't get paid the amount of value that they generate. That worker gets paid for their labor power. Labor power is the price to replenish workers' ability to work. In other words, labor power is how much money it's going to take. Money takes to bring the worker back to work the next day. So what's happening here is that our worker here is working for 10 hours, generating $250 worth of value. That's how much their labor is worth. Their labor, the work that they worked, is worth $250. But they don't get paid their labor. They don't get paid for their labor. We don't get paid for the amount of work that we do. We don't get paid for the amount of value that our work generates. The amount of what we get paid is enough to bring us back to work the next day. What we get paid is the price to replenish our ability to work the next day. That's how much we're getting paid. So we're getting paid labor power as opposed to for the price of our labor. Now, if we go back down here, what we could then see is a couple of things that are happening. That we could figure out what is the rate of profit for the capitalist. So if you take the amount of value produced, if we take the amount of profits that are produced. So if we want to figure out, well, what's the rate of profits? What we could do is we could divide S divided by how much money goes into, how much money we invest into this enterprise. So C plus V. So we could figure out what the rate of profit is by dividing how much value, how much profits we've created, divided by how much money we've put in for overhead cost and for wages. So in our case, it's going to be $100 over 150. So that our rate of profit is equal to 66 2/3%. Just as well, though, we could figure out what the rate is of exploitation of the worker. So from the perspective of the capitalist, we look at the rate of profits. From the perspective of the worker, we could look at the rate at which they are being exploited. So here you are looking at, well, what is the amount of profits that the worker has generated divided by how much they are getting paid. So in our case, it was 100 was the amount of profits, and we only got paid $50, which then means our rate of exploitation, in a sense, is 200%. Right? So that, again, here what we're seeing is that that in order for you to increase profits, in order for you to make more money, if you are the capitalist who owns the factory, what you need to do is to be able to drive down the denominator. You have to drive down this price. Either C has to go down or V has to go down. You either have to drive down your overhead cost, or you need to drive down wages, or both. The more these things go down, the higher your profits are going to be. The problem is that oftentimes overhead costs are much more static. They don't change as much. So you don't have as much power to lower overhead costs. Only maybe if you're able to invest a lot of money into, for example, making your machinery be more productive, then maybe that changes. But the overhead costs stay kind of more or less constant. Where you see then a lot of ability to change and maneuver is around the amount of money that you pay the workers. So many times what happens is that profits or surplus value becomes a function of wages. So as wages go down, profits go up. As wages go up, profits go down. And there are many tactics that if you think about what companies are going to do in order to increase their wages, some of the things that they're going to do and some of the initial things that we saw in the history of capitalism. So for example, if you take in the United States, some of the earlier struggles between employers and unions and fledgling unions and emerging workers collectives was around the number of hours that you work in a day, or getting, for example, weekends. Because if you imagine here, if we extend this hour, instead of working for 10 hours, we work for 11 hours. Now, if we work for 11 hours, we're able to generate another $25 worth of value. And that $25, only $15 of it goes away for overhead costs and wages. So that's an extra $10 worth of profit. So one of the ways that we're going to be able to, capitalism is going to be, or capitalists to be precise, are going to generate more profits is to lengthen the working hours. Another way to generate that profit is to make the workers work longer. Another way is to decrease the cost of labor power. So if, again, labor power is the price to replenish the worker's ability to work, or the money that it takes to bring the worker back to work the next day. One strategy, and we see this nowadays with certain large kind of factories in places like China. An example is the Foxconn company, for example. What they do is they internalize the cost that it is required to replenish the worker's ability to work. So for example, what they'll have is they'll have a dorm and a cafeteria. So instead of paying you money to go look for rent and live somewhere, and we pay you to go and buy food in order to replenish your ability to work the next day, I internalize those costs. I create a dormitory with a cafeteria, and I pay you now less because now you don't have to look for rent and you don't have to look for money. So I'm already providing those things for you, so I could lower your wages. And the calculation is, once I've made that initial investment in the dormitory and the cafeteria, I could in the long run make more money this way. The other way that companies or capitalists are going to look for ways to decrease wages is or to increase the profits is to make this process more productive. So in that example, what they're going to do is figure out, well, how can I get the worker's already working this hour, I'm already paying them $5 for that hour, but maybe instead of making one jersey, can I get them to make 2 jerseys instead? So there they either invest in the machinery itself, maybe the machine could run faster, or instead of the machinery running faster, maybe I could teach the worker to do certain things differently so they could become more productive. So that's another way in which I'm going to lower the price of wages or create a more productive worker in order to generate more value. All right, so what we saw here is that you have the capitalist who starts off with money. The capitalist doesn't have any commodities. He starts off with money, and with that money, they buy a commodity. Exactly what they buy is they buy labor power. They buy your ability to work. And then out of that ability to work, you produce value, and that value is what goes back to the capitalist. So they start off with money, they buy a commodity that then they are able to sell in order to generate more money. And here, the magic of capitalism is not so much magic, but it's a magic trick. Just like all things that we watch on TV, when you're watching magic shows, there's always usually a trick behind it. It's an illusion. Here, the illusion of capitalism is that we get paid for this as opposed to this. So we're never paid exactly how much we produce at work. We get paid enough to keep us coming back to work the next day in order to generate more value that then is taken off as profits for the person who owns the factory. Thank you very much.